Good morning and welcome to the Point. This week in Lansing, there was a vote about income taxes in the state of Michigan. Originally, the bill would have eliminated the income tax over 40 years, but HB 4001 was changed to be a rollback to 3.9%. The fact that it failed in and of itself is an interesting story, and we'll talk about that. But first, before the vote, I sat down with Speaker Tom Leonard, who favored the bill, and with the minority leader, Representative Singh, who was not in favor of the bill. They both explained their positions. We'll hear that, and then we'll talk about what happened, why, and what happens next. I want to start with something that's already in the works, and that's some tax relief that you introduced on the very first day of session in the State House. And it would actually eliminate over a long period of time the income tax that we pay here in the state, which some say is a pretty radical idea.
Well, what I would say is in 2007, as you know, to stop a $1.5 billion, I believe at the time, budget deficit, the income tax was raised under then Jennifer Granholm from 3.9 to 4.35, and I believe it was within 7 to 8 years that promise was supposed to go back to the citizens, or that income tax was supposed to go back to 3.9. So what this bill does first and foremost is it lives up to that promise. In the first year, the income tax would roll back to 3.9 because we owe that money back to the citizens. That money is not ours, it belongs to the citizens of this great state. And then what it would do from there forward is it would eliminate the income tax or phase it out slowly, 1/10 of 1% per year for the next 39 years. So we believe this is a responsible way to do it, and one that we can do it without any drastic cuts.
I need not tell you that you cannot bind future legislatures to that agreement. Is there a way that you can promote that idea with incoming members?
No, but they would have to pass legislation again to overturn what we did, just as you do with any other law. So certainly we cannot bind them. This is certainly something we shouldn't put in the Constitution. It would be law. But if a future legislature thought it was a bad idea, then certainly they could overturn what we did.
Let's talk a little bit about the priorities for this session. I want to start with Republicans. They rolled out last week a pretty long list of things that they'd like to do, and there are probably some things in there that you might be on board with. I won't put words in your mouth. But there are a lot of things in there I'm sure that you and your Democratic caucus are not going to favor. And one of those is taxes and the idea to repeal the income tax, which has since been changed to just rolling it back to 3.9%. Where are you on that kind of a rollback?
Well, I support tax relief for working families. I have no problem with that, but the proposal that they have in front of us right now is giving tax relief to people who haven't needed it and haven't asked for it, to be honest with you. That kind of focus on millionaires and billionaires, to me, is not really the right priority right now. If there is targeted tax cuts for hardworking families, I'd like to look at that, and those are proposals that Democrats have actually put forward to the Republicans. But unfortunately, the proposal that's on the table now, initially was a $9 billion cut. This one is a $1 billion cut. And right now we know there's really extreme issues facing our state. The governor has a report that says there's a $4 billion need for infrastructure. We know our roads aren't getting fixed at the appropriate pace. So if there is money, I'd rather put it towards fixing our roads, fixing our schools, making sure we have enough police and fire in our local communities. And unfortunately, this tax cut is going to actually make sure that we actually cut those services rather than actually do them right.
The developments in Lansing were somewhat surprising. Normally, when the leadership puts a bill up to be voted for, they have the votes to pass it. In this case, 12 Republicans could not go along, and the bill failed, but the idea of doing something about income taxes here in the state of Michigan is not over. HB 4001 could come back in another form, or there could be another bill introduced. Meantime, over in the Senate, they too are talking about something with income taxes in the state. Governor Snyder has expressed his concerns about reducing the revenue flow into the Treasury, so all of that conversation continues, even if HB 4001 got off to a bumpy start when it comes to income taxes here in the state. But there's a lot more going on in Lansing. In fact, Republicans have rolled out their priorities. We'll talk with Speaker Leonard about that and hear what Democrats would like to do when this session continues and when we continue next to the Point. Welcome back to the Point. Well, we've already talked about the unusual happenings in Lansing this week, but before all of that happened, I sat down with Speaker Tom Leonard and with the minority leader, Representative Singh, to talk about what their priorities would be for this legislative session. Now, hear both of those conversations. Let's talk a little bit about when you talk about protecting people's property rights. Now, we're not going to go through every bullet point, but this one will be interesting because this is something that we very often hear people complain about.
Yes, House Republicans, we made immense progress last term on civil asset forfeiture. And, you know, most of our law enforcement, a vast majority of them do a wonderful job, but we've heard very bad stories in the past where people feel that their property was taken from them, if you would, unconstitutionally, and this is something we want to continue to work on. One of the foundations of this great country is being able to own and have property protections, and we want to make certain that those rights are protected here in this great state. So we've made a lot of great progress. We did last term, but we want to make certain that we continue that discussion going forward to ensure that people's private property rights are protected.
I have been wandering around these halls for more than 20 years, and for more than 20 years I've heard people say, you know, we ought to do something about no-fault insurance. Well, once again, that is a priority. What's your thought? What do you think you can do? What is the possible?
We have to continue to work on this, Rick, and I've told people I believe this is the toughest issue to fix here in the city of Lansing. And the reason being is you have two huge lobbies on each side. You've got the insurance lobby on one side, and you've got the hospital lobby or the provider network on the other side. And one of the things we need to work on, and one that nobody can give me a rational reason as to why we have this, is why is it that hospitals, if somebody's injured and they go to a hospital, why is it that they can charge 4 to 5 times the rate of what a commercial health insurance company pays? So for instance, if you're injured in an auto accident and you need a CAT scan or an MRI, if Blue Cross Blue Shield is going to pay, they may pay $700 to $800 for you to have that. If you're injured in an auto accident, it's going to cost anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000. And we need to look at getting those costs under control.
I'm going to move quickly through these, and
That's
with
okay.
the promise
There's
that
a lot in
you'll
here.
come back
Yeah. Yep.
we'll go through some of these more fully. Because, for example, we could do a whole half hour on auto no fault just because of the complexities of it. But let's talk about one issue in this building that always separates the parties, and that's education. Because on one hand, Republicans will say, well, we're putting more money into education and we're paying down some of the debt that's been incurred over the past decades. Democrats will say you need more money in the classroom for the students, and you say in your plan?
What I would say is right now we are spending a record amount on education. Nobody can dispute that fact. The big problem we have here right now is we have what I'm calling a broken teacher retirement system. And one of the first bullet points in this plan is entitled Govern Courageously. And it's not easy to go in and fix some of these problems, but we have a broken teacher retirement system right now that's costing our local school districts 36% of their payroll, and within the next few years, it could even be half of the payroll. We have got to fix that. We've got to get more money into the classrooms, and that's why we're spending more on education than we ever had before, but we're not feeling it in the classrooms because this broken teacher retirement system is eating it up. I'll give you an example. This year alone in the governor's budget proposal, he proposes spending $1.2 billion on this broken system, and that only covers what's above 26% of the payroll. That doesn't even cover the first 26%. So we've got a problem here. We need to resolve this so that we can get more money into the classrooms and hopefully give our hardworking teachers pay raises.
One of the issues that you put in your proposal is something that I know is near and dear to you because of the district that you represent, but I think people sometimes forget how much of Michigan's economy is based on agriculture. We're, I think, the second specialty crop state in the union. There is a lot of varied agricultural activity here. What can the state do to enhance or help with that?
Well, you know, I'm not an ag expert, but when I talk to the ag experts, they say processing. We've got all the tools we have here necessary. We have the climate that we need. We've got some of the best farmers in the world, but processing is a big deal. Why do we take many of our crops or livestock to other states in terms of having them processed? We need better processing here in the state of Michigan to really enhance the agriculture industry.
Kind of a value added thing for agriculture.
Absolutely.
Where the profit comes in.
And it is our second leading industry. We need to continue to grow it.
We saw the battle on roads, we've seen the battle on energy, and two separate points that kind of work together: roads, bridges, infrastructure, and energy. And I assume the other infrastructure is things like the stuff underground, the sewers and pipes and all of that type of thing. Those are two different issues, but they all kind of tie together, and it's a big ticket item to fix.
It is, and I'm glad, well, one, I'm glad the governor mentioned this in a State of the State address. We've got to get smarter with our infrastructure. Not only do we need to invest, but, you know, I think every citizen has seen the road that will get dug up 3 or 4 times in a couple years. And if we've got a situation where we're digging a road up and we've got sewer lines under there, we have cable lines, we all need to work together. Our municipalities need to work with the state. Those in the private industry need to make certain that we're working together to ensure that once that road's dug up, we're fixing it we're only having to fix it one time if there's problems under that road. So I'm glad that the governor talked about more collaboration in our infrastructure projects, ensuring that we're working together and, most importantly, working smarter to save our taxpayer dollars.
Republicans talk a lot about doing away with government regulation, yet government regulation is part of how government works to keep all of the citizenry safe, to make sure that we are somehow protected from something that's either dangerous or unscrupulous. So when you talk about government regulation, what would you like to change?
Well, I am proud of the fact that over the past 6 or 7 years, for every one law we've passed, we've eliminated 10 regulations. There is no doubt that less regulation makes for a better business environment. Now, I'm not talking about no regulation, I'm talking about limited regulation. I'll give you an example. I just talked to a business owner that owns a gas station in my district. I went back, spoke to him, and he showed me where the state came in and they forced him to put in a separate sink because he sells ice in his gas station. Only because he sells ice. I mean, he said he had to pay $2,500 to $3,000 to put in a new sink, new lines because he sells ice, because he's not allowed to wash his hands in the same sink as he would the other one. Those are just silly regulations. We need to make certain that unelected bureaucrats are not promulgating rules that are putting our businesses, making it more burdensome for them, preventing them from hiring more people. So this is something we certainly want to work on to ensure that we have a streamlined and good regulation system here in the state of Michigan.
We'll have a link so somebody can look through all of these, and of course there'll be more information. But tell me of all of this, and there's much more here that we haven't covered. Tell me of this, what do you hold as most important?
For me, there's 3 issues I have been talking about in particular, but one that we have not mentioned yet is mental health. That is a big issue for me. I believe it's a big issue pressing our state. Right now, we spend about $2 billion per year on our corrections budget. And get this, nearly 25% of our prison population suffers from some type of mental illness. And when they do, the costs go from $38,000 per inmate to right around $100,000 per inmate. If we could work on mental illness or mental health reform here in the state of Michigan, allow for earlier intervention, help these individuals get on their medication, we could save a lot of money going forward on our corrections budget.
Well, let me ask about that, and I don't want to get, again, any of these issues I think we could do a whole show on, but when you talk about the mental health reform, the mental health system was reformed a number of years ago in the state, and some people point to that and say that's one of the problems that we have, as you point out, with the correction system now. Would it be your idea that the state would be getting into the mental health business?
Well, I do like the idea of local control. We have our community mental health groups or organizations. What we need to do is we need to bring everybody to the table, and we need to find out what is working in each individual one. Steal those ideas, make certain that we're implementing those across the state, and if something's not working in a particular area of the state, make certain that we're no longer doing that. Again, this is going to be a broad discussion. I just had a meeting earlier about this issue. There's no doubt we're not going to fix this issue over the next 2 years, but we've identified a problem, we've started the discussion, and we need to get to work on it.
When you look at what the Republicans rolled out in a larger view beyond that, they talk about doing away with regulations, though they aren't necessarily specific about those regulations. They talk about a lot of themes that we've heard for a good long while. Have you had a chance to look at some of that, and are there things in there that you could agree with?
Well, there's one area that I think has bipartisan support, both in the House and the Senate, and that's around making sure people have the skills to find the jobs that are available today. And so for me, if we can find more dollars and resources to go towards skilled trades, because we know that there's a lot of openings in all across the state, I want to see that focus, and that's been a Democratic priority. It's been a priority for me, and I've told the Speaker and the Governor and others that if that's something that they want to work on, Democrats will come to the table. But this idea that we can cut $1 billion and not cut our local communities and cut our local schools and not focus on our roads, that's not something we can support. I want to make sure that Michigan is working. I want to make sure that we're competitive economically, and investing in our schools, investing in our communities, and investing in our roads is a key priority.
When you talked about infrastructure in that report, and the governor brought that up during his budget recommendation, and he talked about the idea of getting started. He and I sat down and he said, look, we can't do that all this year, of course, and it wouldn't be physically possible anyway. But he wants to get that process started because he says it's a long-term investment and something that, it's unlike roads, you don't run over the potholes that are underground every day, but when they crop up, it's a big, big problem. Is that another area where you might be able to, if indeed Republicans are willing to start down that road, so to speak?
Yeah, I definitely think infrastructure is important. For us, whether it's roads and bridges or sewer systems or water systems, we need to make that investment. It's going to make us competitive economically with other states. And so I was a little disappointed that the new money that the governor put in the budget was only $20 million. So when you look at a $4 billion problem, only having that additional $20 million, I don't think is enough. I think we've got to be more bold about that because it does two things. One, it helps us and our communities become strong, but it also puts people back to work. And that's another key priority for us. And that's why infrastructure spending is very important. It helps our communities and make sure we don't have a catastrophe like has happened in Flint happen in other communities, because we know that that could happen in our communities anywhere in the state. And so if we can actually put the dollars now towards these things and put people back to work, I think that's a win-win, and that's something that Democrats support.
Let's swap offices for a moment. We'll move you across the hall, and now it's your turn to set out the priorities. We know what the Republicans have said about them. Where, beyond the things we've already discussed, would you like to see this legislature go?
Sure. There's two areas that I haven't really heard from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. One is around education funding. Right now, the governor actually has a report on his desk that shows about $1,200 per pupil is missing. And so what does that mean? That means in our local schools, we actually have bigger classroom sizes when we could actually have more resources in our schools. So for me, that would be number one priority, making sure that we had the right amount of money going into our K through 12 schools. Second is around higher education. We still continue to lag behind other states in our investment in higher education. The amount of money we give to students for financial aid is in the lowest 10 states in the entire country. We should be a top 10 state in investing in that young talent that we have here, make sure that they stay here. But if they can't afford to go to college here, we're losing a great opportunity. And so those are two areas I'd really want to take a look at. And if you want a third, to round it off into a third, I would also focus on our local communities. We have cut over $7.5 billion over the past 15 years to our local communities, which has meant they have to lay off firefighters and police officers. They have 5,000 less today than they did 15 years ago. And for me, I'd rather have those resources going back into our local communities so we can have the protection so our communities are safe. And those would be the three areas I'd really want to focus on.
You did not say this, but as you were talking, I was doing a little math. So if it's $7.5 billion that has been cut in revenue sharing, I assume,
right,
primarily, $4 billion in infrastructure, and whatever education costs, we're going to quickly get up to $15 billion of priorities that you would like to deal with. But the realist in you knows that there's not $15 billion disposable. So how would you approach that economically? Because obviously there are people out there that are watching this program this morning, they're saying, yes, I'd like to have more money in the classroom. I'd like to have more money in infrastructure. And everybody who serves in city or township government is saying, yeah, we want our revenue sharing back for sure. But they're probably some of those same people saying, I wouldn't mind getting that tax rollback they're talking about.
Sure, and the question is, what are we getting in return for that tax rollback? I mean, if someone's getting $13 a month for that year, and we could collectively use that to make sure we actually funded our schools appropriately, or we made sure that a sinkhole that happened down in southeast Michigan that now is impacting hundreds of thousands of people doesn't happen in the west side of the state, or we don't have another Flint, I think people are willing to invest in that, and that's what I've seen. I've heard people want to make sure that Michigan is successful. If you're going to be ready for a global economy, we have to be positioning ourselves, and that's where I really see us making that wise investment. Now, obviously, you have to do it within the budget that we have here today, and that's something I'm committed to doing. And so, to me, I'd like to take a look at our corrections budget, be able to cut dollars and resources out of that, and make sure that we still keep people safe. But if somebody's 85 years old and no threat to our community, why do we still have them in prison when they could be out in the in more of a community type of setting? And I think there's ways to find those types of resources to make sure we meet the needs of our schools and our local communities.
Well, you mentioned corrections, which is a big chunk in the budget, and there's a phrase that I hear often, usually from your colleagues in the Democratic Party, but even increasingly with some Republicans who say that they have to make the distinction about who we put in jail. Do you put people in jail that you're mad at, or that you put people in jail that you're afraid of? And there has been some conversation about changing some of the guidelines, about changing some of the sentencing requirements. Is that a conversation that gets traction? Because it seemed to kind of be boiling up towards the end of last session, and then it just faded away.
Well, there are bipartisan conversations happening. They'll be restarted this session as well, because again, I think you're absolutely right. You know, the days of us taking somebody because they got caught smoking marijuana and putting them in jail makes absolutely no sense for our economy. Now, if somebody's a violent offender, I want them in jail. I want them away from the general public. But if somebody did something silly and foolish, you know, let's get them the help that they might need personally, or the mental health that they might need. Let's get them that help. It's much cheaper to do that than actually put them into prison, and we can bring down our costs. When you take a look at the other states around us, they actually pay a lot less for their prison systems, because they actually put different type of people into prison. And so for me, I'd rather focus on these violent offenders, make sure that they're put away. But for somebody who's 90 years old and not a threat to our community, or somebody who got caught smoking marijuana, to me, I think there's different ways of dealing with those individuals that'll be much less costly to the state, and we can then rearrange that money to key priorities that I think everybody in our state cares about.
Speaker Leonard, in his list of things that they would like to do during the session, talked about more help for mental health. So that conversation is going on here too, because that system was changed dramatically 20 plus years ago in the state. That too will come with a price tag, but apparently you agree with him, at least to the degree that it is much less expensive to treat people early on.
Absolutely. A lot of times we find the people that end up in prison are people that have mental health issues, and if you just got them the right medication and the right type of treatment, they wouldn't end up there. And so when you have a prisoner in the prison setting that has mental health, their costs are significant. They're all the way up to $100,000 per prisoner, when the average rate for a prisoner is about $35,000. And so if you actually give somebody treatment and then some psychiatric care early on, it's very likely that they won't even end up in the prison system, and you're going to save a significant amount of money. And so that is an area that I think there can be bipartisan support around. Again, if we deal with some of these issues on the front end, before people actually create a crime or end up in prison, we're going to save a lot of money for our state. And that's how other states are doing it, and they have actually lower crime rates than Michigan. And so that's a key priority of ours, is to do this much smarter than we have been over the last decade.
We know what you'd like to do, or at least part of what you would like to do. Talk to me about the ability to do it. What is the atmosphere here? You've got a new speaker, new leadership down in the House, new leadership for the Democrats as well. What is the general atmosphere as we start to really get into the legislative season?
Well, I'm hopeful that we'll have more bipartisanship around town here. I think we ended our session last year in a very solid way. There was a conversation around energy and how we looked at long-term energy to make sure that we had lower rates for all of our citizens, but made sure we had more renewable energy and more energy efficiency. And we were able to come together, Democrats and Republicans, to do that. And so if there are key areas, and I've already mentioned those, whether it's school funding, whether it's infrastructure spending, or fixing our roads, Democrats want to be there and be part of that solution. Now, if it's just people who want to do a far-right agenda and just focus on social issues and things that don't move our economy forward, I don't want to deal with those issues. I want to deal with things that give people jobs and make sure that we're economically viable as a state.
So there are the priorities for Democrats and Republicans, but what will happen with those priorities? What will this session look like? After that vote on taxes that left at least 12 Republicans on the outside and one member being replaced as a committee chairman, will they come back together to pursue those priorities? It's something we'll be watching as we go through the year. I'll have a final word next. To the point. So in Washington and in Lansing, things are getting off to a bit of a rocky start for this new legislative session. There's still much to be done in both places. Of course, in Lansing, the first order of business will be the budget. We'll be following that process and, of course, keeping a close eye on Washington. When you join us Sunday morning, 10 o'clock, right here on Wood TV 8 for To the Point.